Happy Sunday morning to everyone. This show is coming to you from Florida on a gorgeous Sunday morning overlooking the gentle lapping waves on the Gulf of Mexico. My motivation for this podcast channel is to broadcast good news stories, interesting people, and food for thought. So pour yourself a nice hot cup of tea or coffee, take a deep breath, get cozy, and enjoy taking a break for some uplifting conversations. Today's guest is Claire Latane. Her book is Schools That Heal: Design with Mental Health in Mind, published by Island Press in 2021. Hi, Claire. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tricia. It's such an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for being here on a beautiful Sunday morning. And I have my cup of tea. Do you have your cup of coffee?
I, like you, am a tea drinker, so I've got my tea ready.
You got your tea ready. Well, let's talk about your new book. It's Schools That Heal. And could you start with telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So first, in order of importance, I'm a mom. I have 3 now grown children. When they were young, I went back to school to study landscape architecture after studying journalism in my undergraduate degree. And I studied landscape architecture because I really wanted to make the world a healthier place for my children. And I practiced landscape architecture for about 14 years in a couple of pretty well-known landscape architecture firms here in Southern California. And then probably about 5 years ago, I had the opportunity, the real privilege of earning a fellowship in innovation and leadership from the Landscape Architecture Foundation in order to study this topic. How can we make schools healthier places for children and teenagers, especially in terms of mental health and well-being? And through that fellowship, I was invited by Island Press to write this book, which sort of sparked my interest in joining academia, because, as you know, it's hard to balance full-time design practice with writing a book. So for the last 3 years, I've been teaching and working at Cal Poly Pomona in their landscape architecture department, and really focused on furthering the knowledge and the design practice through teaching that's presented in this book.
Well, I guess that gets a little bit to always my first question. So, what was your motivation for writing this book?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And one of the reasons I started with being a mom is because this book really came out of the gaps in knowledge and resources that I struggled with trying to raise my children in Los Angeles public schools, really struggling with the same issues that most people find in public schools today, which are pretty stark environments, outdoor environments, indoor environments, designed with this sort of 100-year-old tradition of industrialized education. The physical environments in our schools really haven't changed much, even as what happens in school might change pretty regularly, although maybe not that dramatically. So when my children were really small, I think all 3 of them could be described as alternative learners. They really needed interactive environments and nature and places where they could either be really active or, in the case of my daughter, more quiet and alone. And their school environment just didn't have very much variety, or really any variety to choose from. And then as they got older, they all 3 struggled with mental health issues and depression, stress, anxiety, trauma, that seemed to be exacerbated or made worse rather than made better by their school's physical environment. So I really wrote this book as a way to explore some solutions. Like, how do we make schools a more inviting, welcoming, nurturing places for our students as they struggle with more and more um, really higher rates of anxiety and stress and depression, and now, of course, the trauma of the pandemic as we start thinking about coming back to it. I really wrote the book that I needed as a young parent, and and hoped that this would help other parents as well as educators, students, community members, decision makers, really anyone that wanted to explore this topic to have a good foundation about how we where we go from here.
Well, let me ask you, as I was going through your book, and at the beginning you say, what does a healthy school look like, and why is it so hard to create? We have everything in this country. Why is it so hard to figure out what it should look like?
Yeah, I mean it's such a simple and yet complex question. um, I mean, I think that one of the reasons is that it's hard to imagine what a healthy school looks like is that a healthy school is going to be different depending on where you are in the country, where you are, what your community looks like and feels like, who's in it. But also, we have this, it's hard to imagine what it looks like because our schools, like I said, tend to be really rigid, similar learning environments. The, the trash truck is driving by as we speak.
It's
They
okay.
seem
Just
to they seem to be similar across this country, and actually are really similar in a lot of places around the world. Surprisingly, in terms of they are places that because they were the school facilities as they are designed today, and we're talking about traditional public education. There are there are some progressive, different models of education spur popping up here and there, but and have been for a long time. But in terms of the everyday public school in most neighborhoods, it's a response to this industrialized method of education from over 100 years ago, where you're training the future workers of the world, and it's a facility that can easily be replicated across the country and can easily be maintained. So the hurdles to thinking about what a healthy school looks like are both because we might not most people haven't seen or experienced a good example, and then the sort of administrative momentum towards thinking about maintaining a school facility often outweigh the needs of the individual school community.
Well, that makes me kind of feel lucky, because I was thinking about where I grew up. I grew up in a Florida Panhandle, and I mean, I'm sure from this book, it's like, yeah, we could have had more, but it was an open concept type thing. We could walk outside between classes a lot, and then I came down here to Miami a few years ago, and I remember I drove past this building. I thought, did they put a jail in this city? And then
Mhm.
I looked and I thought, oh my gosh, that's a school.
Yeah.
Like that looked like a jail to me. And
Yeah. Not an uncommon response, especially in the upper grades like middle school and high school. And that's a really common way. I ask people all the time, what was your school like? Um, how did it make you feel? Especially because my kids are grown now. So whenever I meet one of their new friends, we often start talking about school for obvious reasons. And they'll often say, "Oh, yeah, it felt like a prison. It felt like a jail." And it sounds like your experience of school might have been similar to mine. And I don't want to assume your age, but I grew up in the 70s during an era of progressive education. And we had that open model school where the the buildings were small and homey and plenty of windows. But more importantly, we had a lot of freedom during the day to do art projects, or, I was in an informal program where we really could learn at our own pace and do what we wanted to do. We had a lot of choice during the day, and that was not my children's experience at all. And the school environments over the between the 70s and now, we really went through this um, increase in students, this population bubble, and a lot of schools became heavily overcrowded and became more and more paved. And then with the fear around really horrible events like school shootings, schools in a lot of cases became more and more hardened and fenced in and gated, and it just sort of compiled until they feel like they are today.
Let's get into the book. And at the beginning, you lay out your plan for why it's important to keep mental health in mind. And you've listed 9 reasons here. Um, can you talk a little bit more about your reasons?
Sure. Right from the beginning, I really wanted to expand people's view about mental health, and mental health being a thread that is not just about an individual's well-being, but a lens that we can look at to think about and design for broader issues. So that those 9 reasons why we should design schools with mental health in mind range from what children need and teenagers need to develop healthy nervous and immune systems. That if we think about schools as not just individual community centers, which is a really important part of what they are, but that there are many of them spread throughout cities, and that if you think about them together, the impact that a healthy school can have when it's replicated across a community or a district, that they really can go a long way to improve public health and equity and climate resilience in a city. Um, the 9 reasons are really trying to prove the case that if we look at school design and consider school design with mental health in mind, we can address other issues like restorative justice, like physical health, like educational excellence, um, community building. It can address a lot of the things that we're grappling with today, um, equity and inclusion, and as well as showing young people that the generation that's making decisions today about school design, cares about them and cares about their future and the future of the planet that they're inheriting from us.
Well, there's one in here that I really like. I'm going to mention it.
Great.
I was talking to Chip Sullivan a while
Uh-huh.
back, and we were talking about, of all things, the cat nap. And you got here, it's page 47 for those listening. Shifts in thinking. Once children outgrow nap time at school, we tend to underestimate the importance of rest. Uh, what do you think about the importance of creating these, quiet little afternoon siestas? I was talking to Chip, and he like, yeah, I get my best ideas after a cat nap. What
Oh
about
yeah.
you?
I mean, this was like a running joke in one of my in one of my workplaces, because I was constantly like, can we put in a napping room? Can we hang some hammocks or something? Like, I need a nap after lunch or at 2 o'clock. So yeah, I'm 100% with Chip. And this is what especially teenagers as they're grappling with stress, they ask for a place to go and be alone, not necessarily to take a nap, but just to rest and be quiet and calm and de-stress. They have the vocabulary and they know what they want. We just need to make space to listen to them and provide those areas. And the New York City Department of Mental Health and Hygiene a few years ago worked on a project with 10 New York City schools where they worked with students to create a sort of an advocacy and education plan campaign for mental health. And at the end of the year, the students created a poster to share information about where to go for mental health support, and they also received a little grant to create a space on campus that they could design, that they could identify what they needed and wanted, and then create. And these students made meditation rooms, chill rooms, chill spaces, outdoor gardens with rocking chairs. That was what they needed. They needed a space to go decompress and be quiet and just regroup in their own minds. So napping is, I think, yeah, resting our minds, resting our bodies is so undervalued in the school environments today. It's probably really in so many of our environments, office too, right? There's nowhere to go and just lie down and take a load off for a minute.
Well, I will say that that other Sunday morning show that I like too,
Mm-hmm.
on TV, and
My
yeah, it was.
absolute favorite.
You love it too? Yeah, me too.
Oh, yeah.
And they talked about the Red Sox, and they had a sleep doctor. And after they had a nap room for a year, they had had such a bad losing streak. The next year, they won the World Series just just from taking rest.
Wow.
And they even bought their sleep doctor like a World Series ring. And
Wow.
yeah, they were so
Yeah.
grateful. Yeah, we you just need sometimes just a chair and a like we're doing now. Just just chill with a cup of your favorite something, your beverage, and relax for a little bit before you go back to work.
Yeah.
Um, and how important that having those places be, or even if you're being active, like walking and such.
Yeah. That's
Well,
right.
let me ask you. So why is this so hard to? If I'm a parent, okay, and I go to the school board and I say, hey, I've got this research, I got this book. I'd like to implement some of these ideas. Why? How do you suggest doing that?
Yeah. I think that it depends on where you are, where, sort of who you are and where you are. I would say the best place to start is with the principal of the school or a teacher, if you have a close relationship with a teacher, or if you are a teacher, to start with the principal. And because if the principal isn't on board, it's going to be really difficult to get anything done. So I think starting with small conversations with the principal um, to find out what the issues are and what they're doing already to support mental health and what they're doing already to support environmental literacy, for instance. I think one mistake we often make as parents is to think that to forget to listen first and really understand the context that our children are learning in, because teachers and school administrators are doing so much for our children. So I think the most important thing is just, no matter who you're talking to about this, is to really start with the attitude that they have what's best in mind for the students that are in their school, and to listen first. So to try to get a sense of what's happening at the school already, what some of the initiatives are, and then what the hurdles might be, to providing softer spaces, more nature, because there can be a lot of hurdles that are not in the control necessarily of the school, of the principal or the school. I think for those listeners that have relationships with school boards or who are on the school board, I mean, right now they're struggling with so much angst and trauma around just trying to get students back to school in a safe manner. So that's 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 a whole nother conversation. But the idea of providing nature filled outdoor environments as well as indoor environments is really vital to think when you think about health and healthy immune systems and mental health. It all works together. So there are I think there are some important sort of ways in other words, when you start having a conversation. And one of those ways in can be talking about the context of today and COVID-19 and needing to have healthier places to learn outside as well as more fresh air and views to nature inside, and but also to find the way in by talking to that school decision maker, whether it's a principal or teacher or administrator or board member.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's nice. I like to just listen first.
mhm. Yeah, and then the other thing for parents is to remember that you have, even if you have lots of children. I mean, I had my kids were school age for 24 years. And but even if you have lots of children, the the school that you're part of is has had many generations of parents with many good ideas and good intentions, only to see those ideas be left behind when the children move on to other schools. So they're understandably wary, and it's hard sometimes for them to accept new ideas, knowing that you're going to move on as a parent. So for that reason, and because your kids are not the only kids in that school, it's really important to have a whole school, a whole community conversation about what's important, because each of us thinks we know we have the best idea, right? But that idea is not going to go anywhere if you don't work with the entire school community, um, to make sure that you're not missing something, or that you're not offending, leaving anyone out. So I think having a broader conversation with the parent and teacher group, that could be through the PTA, it could be through um, a school foundation if there is one. It could be through one of the programs, which might be a way in, like a restorative justice program or a counseling program, or even a vocational training program. It could be through one of those to just give any improvements that are made a bigger chance of survival, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I didn't think about it, but yeah, once the kids move through the grades and then they move on to another school, yeah, about how do you keep that continuity of that idea back to make sure that
Mhm.
it gets finished?
Yeah, and lives on, and also to make sure that it reflects the whole community, and that includes, all grade levels, any special needs programs, every culture that's represented in the school. It needs to be inclusive from the beginning in order to have a chance of the community taking ownership of it.
That kind of leads me to this next page that I really like. It was on 54, and you're talking about building equity for all species. So we have human species, we have all species. I like this from a Native American um, ecologist. So you're talking about how toddlers speak of plants and animals as if they were people extending off from themselves. And how does your design ideas teach compassion and empathy that you're talking about here in your book?
Yeah, this piece is really inspired. Robin Wall Kimmerer is one of my favorite authors, and she's um, an ecologist as well as um, a teacher at SUNY ESF. And her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, I highly recommend it to anyone interested in creating healthier environments and inclusive learning environments. And the idea of creating that a healthy place for our children has to include all living creatures, all things on this earth, right? Because for lots of reasons, many more than I could possibly think of. But one of the things that does for our children and our teenagers is when we invite in animals, wildlife, birds, butterflies, insects um, into a schoolyard, that immediately fascinates and attracts children and teachers too, all of us. It creates this sort of mutual relationship between nature and children and teenagers that we have to nurture if they're going to know how to interact and relate and understand the natural world and be interested in fighting for its healthy future.
And it also,
And
go ahead.
sorry,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. That can include. I mean, that can include habitat gardens, and there are some great examples of how a simple patch of habitat has really sparked educational outcomes, like really improved educational outcomes. But it could also include for students that are struggling with different kinds of trauma or learning differences or developmental differences. It can also include like a class pet or a school pet, like raising bunnies or chickens or other animals to just nurture that sense of responsibility and care that children of all ages have from a young age. And that can nourish empathy as well. And there's plenty of research too that shows just being in a natural, organic, free play setting promotes positive behavior between students. It really helps support healthy social interaction and creativity and play, as opposed to the more competitive. What we find today is most schoolyards are 100% dedicated to competitive sports or that kind of kickball, basketball, um, foursquare kind of sports tradition. I guess you would call it traditional sports instead of the more creative play. And so by creating places on school grounds for all aged children and youth that invite creativity and free play in nature and just social play, that can create strong bonds between students and the environment, and also give students something to really special to remember and hang on to about that school, so that when they grow up they want their kids to go to school there, and they remain connected to the school and want to come back and see how the garden is growing or whatever it is, visit the little mini forest that they plant in the school. So
Oh, I just saw an in there for the principal alumni donations.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe sometimes more importantly, alumni time, volunteer time, mentorship to students that are there now.
Gosh, this is really taking me back now because I remember, what was it? First grade. I think her name was Miss Bat, of all things. We had guinea pigs in our classroom.
Hmm.
Snoopy, and I think it was Snoopy. It must have been Charlie. Um, did you have pets in your
We
classroom?
did. I'm sure we had a guinea pig or a hamster or something. Yeah. Yeah.
And we all loved it. It was cool. And
Yeah, it's kind of like the thing that can bring everyone together. Who doesn't love the class pet?
yeah.
Having moments like that is really important.
Well, I'm really feeling sorry for the kids because even on page 67, I can see here for the audience listening, there's this big wall of windows, and I'm like, yeah, that's my elementary school. It was Valparaiso Elementary. I would say I grew up in the '80s, so most of
Hmm.
most of my school time was then, and yeah, that's exactly what our classrooms were designed. A lot of them,
And
big
I'm
open
not on that.
windows.
Yeah. And the windows, I mean, it's funny because this is where, I'm coming from the design perspective, and a lot of this book sort of is on the edge of talking about design and then teaching approach. And I really try to stay hard into the design world because that's what my education and background is in. But it's in some cases you really have to. Um, there's not a hard line between teaching approach and the design of the teaching environment. And Windows is one of those things that a lot of teachers that I've talked to and experts on teaching have talked to me about how little is mentioned um, in the education world about the physical environment itself. And there is this long-standing myth that you can see in that when you visit schools and all the blinds are closed, or in the case of one of my kids' schools, the all of the windows were covered with poster board and cork and layers of things to block the views of the windows. There's this long-standing myth that a lot of teachers still believe that you have to that you are only being successful in reaching those children if their eyes are on you as the teacher. And the research just doesn't back that up. In fact, students really they know what their bodies and minds need, and if they're looking out the window daydreaming at a tree or a garden, hopefully there's a view out there. If there's not, it's a really good opportunity to plant a tree. But they're doing what their bodies are telling them, and they're trying to find a moment of rest for their minds. What Stephen and Rachel Kaplan call um, restorative fascination, restful attention restoration theory is their theory, and it's like this resting um, restful fascination that we have when we watch leaves blow in the breeze, or watch and hear birds and flutter, or water moving, those kinds of things that fascinate us but don't exhaust us.
Well, that's it. That leads to another question here that I had about your book. You talk about, uh, we'll go to the design part a little bit. Do you advocate for more programmed areas, unprogrammed areas? What about special needs children and of all types? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
what's okay? Let's say I've convinced the teacher. I've got a plan. I want to do this, and what do I do? What's something good to do? What did you find in your book and your research?
I mean, that's such a hard question because it relies so much on every individual school. But I mean, to your point, we need to make sure we're talking to special education teachers, all staff, really engaging everyone in the conversation because they know their students. And special education teachers in particular are often really, really creative because they're already finding creative solutions to engage children in learning that supports them. But there are some, I think, as an antithesis to how most schools, the resources that schools already have, um, and that's asphalt and maybe, if you're lucky, living grass. It's really nice to offer some variety. Professor Marcella Rainey at Occidental College has been studying green schoolyards at the elementary level, and has a few articles about it that I cite in this book. She and I have been collaborating on some design work for a couple of local elementary schools, and she found in her research that the variety, offering a variety of places and types of play is really important to make sure that children of all ages, genders, um, play, or engage in active physical play. So if we only offer hardtop and grass, then the kids that are really comfortable and doing playing with ball sports, for instance, or running and being active that way are going to be really active. But the kids that want more and need more variety in their play, like climbing logs or jumping or digging in the dirt, then they really benefit from having a lot more variety and choice. And so often we have these schoolyards that have asphalt, maybe grass, and maybe a play structure, and that's really limiting. Only one or two or three children at a time can engage on a play structure, for instance. Whereas if you have a little patch of woods, trees, and plants underneath, and an accessible surface so that children with mobility challenges can get on there as well, then you can invite children of a lot of different inclinations to play. And one of the important things that's really easy but really hard is to think about getting rid of playground rules, because there is research as well showing that just just allowing children to play how they want and with who they want and where they want on the school ground actually invites a lot more creativity. It builds social skills. It engages students in doing what they want. And it actually reduces conflict on the schoolyard over time. So that can be a really hard, sort of a hard sell for playground monitors, because it's ingrained in us, right, from as parents and teachers and educators, like, you have to keep control of your children. But when you start looking at the research and what actually works to allow children to build social skills, especially at those younger ages, but even at the older ages too, we need to kind of give them more freedom, more free play, and more independence in what they're doing.
Oh, I think that's a really good point. And to trust that kids, this is where they do need more freedom to learn and make mistakes and learn when the stakes are pretty low.
Yeah, and that can be, coming back to your question about programming, that can be as simple as taking the science class that you've been teaching for 10 years in a classroom out into a school garden twice a week. One of our Cal Poly Pomona landscape architecture students, Lisa Strong, wrote her thesis on an outdoor learning intervention in Los Angeles. And they did a 6-week learning intervention where teachers just took their class outside for 30 minutes twice a week for 6 weeks. And it had a profound impact on the teachers' perceptions of the students, especially struggling students. Before the intervention, in a survey, the 100% of the teachers had responded that struggling students gave up too quickly. And after the intervention, 0 teachers responded that struggling students gave up too quickly when faced with challenges. They all instead realized that saw students working harder, like not giving up. So, and I think if you think about the impact a teacher's perception of you as a student has on your entire academic career and future, it's a big one. But what that also says is that students do better and they're more interested. And the students that really struggle in the classroom often are the strongest students when it comes to learning outside and interacting and finding things outside, or asking the interesting question when you're in an interactive or experiential learning environment.
Well, I do. I find that fascinating. And, I also want to ask you too, what, kind of defies what we think is true and doesn't, it's not always true, is the Sandy Hook school. And I, like everybody else, saw what happened on TV, and then life gets busy, and I never followed up to see what happened with that school. But I really like that you put that in there. Could you talk more about what did they do instead of building security gates?
Yeah, that was a really powerful example. While, right after the tragedy at Sandy Hook, the school district rearranged some planned improvements so that they could rebuild that school first. It was already on the plan, but they wanted to rebuild that school first to give the community a way to heal. And the design process that the architects took, the approach that they took was to bring together a community advisory committee of 50 people to represent that would well represent the community. So they had teachers and parents and special education and counselors and security staff and all, healthcare workers and all kinds of people, school staff, survivors on their committee with the design team to go through together, make decisions together about what the new school should look like and feel like. And they really wanted it to feel like a safe and nurturing environment, which is not the case when you put up barbed wire fence or cameras everywhere. So they looked to the research once the community had decided that they wanted their school to look like and feel like an embrace. They looked to the research on what we need as humans to feel safe, and that's a lot of the research that I've introduced very briefly in this book. And they designed a school that is full of natural materials and sunlight and warmth, um, homey furniture, and that presents itself to the community with, like in an arc, as if it's outstretched arms. And they use techniques, like all of the school offices are on the front of the building, so that the staff that's in their offices most of the day can see who's approaching and just keep an eye on the school. So they use sort of natural surveillance instead of the technology. They still have a fence around the perimeter but it's not front and center. Like, you don't have to go through gates to get into the school. You go in through a front door, and it feels like a welcoming, inviting space. So it's really, I think, the most interesting and poignant thing about that choice is that this is a school that suffered the biggest tragedy in school shootings in our memories. And yet, while all the other around the country, schools are turning to gates and guards and guns, that school made a completely different decision. And, I think that one of the difficult things we have to ask ourselves is how to make room to allow all communities to make those decisions, no matter where you are. We have this mythology around city schools, urban schools, that that they need to be gated and secure for the students' safety, but it really just ends up making those students feel trapped and imprisoned and not wanting to be there or learn there.
Yeah, I will say, yeah, from the time that you and I went to school, I never even occurred to me that any of the tragedies that have happened would have happened when I was younger,
Hmm.
and how open our campuses were, and we never gave it a second thought.
Yeah, and there are still campuses that are
Yeah.
plenty open. I think the important thing to remember, and this is what I learned after seeing and hearing about schools across the country, is that there are schools that are fully paved and don't have windows, not one single window in them, in downtown urban areas and um, rural areas. Like the location of the school doesn't really matter. There's great examples of beautiful open campuses in downtown, near city centers and out in more open areas. And there's examples of schools that are hardened and prison like everywhere in the country. It's really it's really interesting. So it's the question is really about how do we engage our community and really look deeply at the research about around what works to create an inclusive and welcoming and community supported school environment for all of our students.
Well, let me ask you, you've got a lot of brilliant case studies here in the book at the back, and I usually like to ask my guests. So, what's one of your favorites and why?
It's such a hard question. It's like choosing a favorite child.
That's what everybody
Um,
says.
yeah, and in this, people are asking me this a lot. Like, how did I select these schools? And I will just take the opportunity to say that these schools were I selected them because I learned about them. I found them. Somebody introduced them to me. I had access to them. And that's important to say because there are probably thousands of beautiful examples of schools around the world that I didn't have access to, that I didn't learn about. And I would love to make sure that people ask around. I would love for this to be um, the beginning of a conversation where I would love for people to send me examples from parts of the country and the world that are not included in this book. But the ones that I did select I wanted to show a variety, a real breadth of solutions and of schools that might remind readers of the school that they want to improve. So there are small schools and larger schools and every age group. We have elementary, middle school, and high school. We have schools that serve developmentally challenged students. Schools that serve. There's one private school included because it serves twice exceptional students who are intellectually advanced and have learning other developmental differences or challenges, and the others are all public. We have one charter school that's an environmental charter high school in Lawndale, California, which is a beautiful example of nature based education and community based education. And the others are a variety of public schools that with different numbers of students, different, like some of them were, I think we had one new school. Sandy Hook was the only brand new school. Marshall High School was had a good renovation in Fairfax County, Virginia, had a pretty good size renovation and an addition. And the others were all different levels of intervention, from in some cases just programmatic. And so like Ascend School in Oakland, which is another charter school. Okay, I have two charter schools, which is another charter school, went through a student centered exercise to try to reimagine that school for safety. But it also had a really interesting history and vision of being student-centered and inclusive from the foundation. So I was really looking for a variety. And because of that, I really can't choose a favorite because they're all so important for different people. Depending on who you are and where your school is, you might really want to look at one or the other.
So basically, this is a nice strategy book for anybody to get started. A nice how-to book.
That's my hope. I really wanted it to be a tool for action. Here's like set up what is the issue? What are some solutions? Why do we want to support support mental health through design? What are the opportunities there, and why do we want to do it? And then here's how you can go about thinking about it and start educating yourself, or where to start. There's conversation tips, but there's also some beginnings of ideas around funding, and then these examples that provide not just design ideas, but how were they implemented, which could provide further support.
Oh, excellent.
So that's the hope. Like how, if you want to think about, I think from my approach is really based on this idea of solutions oriented approaches for journalism and design. Like how can we frame the issue as an opportunity and then do something about it, instead of, if you suffer from depression, as I have many times in my life, you don't want to get bogged down in all the issues unless there's a solution on the horizon. Like here's what's happening, and now let's do something about it and try to share some optimism. That's really, I think, what our young people need, is for us to take action
Empowerment.
immediately.
Yeah, empowerment, and then I like that. Do something. Take some action.
Yeah.
Make it happen. Don't just talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Claire, it's been so nice to meet you here this Sunday morning, and my cup of tea is gone. I don't know about yours, but it's been lovely chatting with you this morning, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell the audience about your next project.
But great. It's the time has just flown by, I will say, and my tea is cold here next to me. So that means I've been doing too much of the talking. But what I'm working on now is really trying to amplify this work. A lot of the ideas in this book came out of a school design studio that I've been running for the last 3 years, where I partner our graduate students at Cal Poly Pomona with local schools, and they work with the school communities and students to reimagine their schools. And then we try to partner those schools with nonprofit organizations that can write grants to implement those changes. And so now my latest effort is a new collaborative for healthy and inclusive learning environments, or CHILLE, at the Lyle Center for Regenerative Studies at Cal Poly Pomona. And this is going to be a national partnership of faculty and experts around the country who can help other faculty and university programs work with their own community schools to make a bigger impact. So we'll share resources like design studio syllabi. We'll have a shared list of guest lecturers who are experts in community-led design or health, design for public health, and other topics. And we'll do our best to have a website soon, and really, really trying to amplify this movement to help as many schools and students as possible.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Well, you'll have to keep in touch and let us know how that's going and when you're ready to write that next book. Take care.
Thank you so much, Tricia.
Again, thank you for joining us here on this lovely Sunday morning. Today's guest was Claire Latané. Her book is Schools That Heal, Design with Mental Health in Mind, published by Island Press in 2021. If you have any ideas for books, or if you're an interesting person yourself, please drop me an email at sundaymorningcuppa, that's CUPPA, at gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. This podcast channel is just getting started, and so tune back in on Sunday mornings to have another hot cup of coffee or tea with us. Thank you so much for joining. Enjoy your weekend.